Good evening. This is our first class in the new series this year, the Parsha class entitled Tributaries of Eden. And by that, I'm referring to the rivers which flow from Eden, the 4 different rivers. And it has been said by the holy books that even though the Torah in Parshas Bereshis describes this large river from which 4 different tributaries branch out, and why the Torah has to tell you this? Why is it important that there are these 4 rivers of Eden? So there are those who explain that the rivers of Eden are actually the main branches of the different ways of looking at the Torah. The water representing the Torah, which flows from Eden, which flows from the knowledge of God down to where mankind lives. And even though in its source, the Torah is one, but as it comes down into the world, the same Torah, the same water can take on different forms.
Is that like Pshat?
Right. So generally it's associated with the 4 areas of the Torah, which is Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, referred to by their acronym Pardes, which literally means orchard, but Pardes is Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod. Pshat is the basic understanding of the Torah, and Remez is allusions or hints that you can find within the Torah. Drush is the Medrash, which expounds on words and different clues within the Torah, and Sod are the secrets of the Torah. And what I'd like to each week is try to bring out, especially where you have a verse in the Torah that has such varied explanations, to see how the same words could be alluding to so many different ideas, and hopefully if we have a chance in those classes to sort of show how the different branches or different perspectives of looking at something are still technically the same on some level. Going back to the source to see how they're related. So I don't know if we'll do all 4 each week, or that we'll do 4, maybe we'll do more than 4 some weeks. I don't know if I've decided that yet, but at least we'll try to get different perspectives on the Parsha. So before we begin, I just want to tell you, this week's Parsha, we have such a good example of this. Because we have the story in this week's Parsha of the Tower of Babel. These people got together to build this tower, and God dispersed them. And the Midrash Rabbah starts off with the following cryptic statement. The verse, and we'll get to the verse more inside soon, but just outside, the verse starts off, Vayhi kol haaretz, the entire land, was safa echas, one language, udvarim achadim, and unified words, common words, shared words, unified objects. It's hard to even translate those words. Devarim achadim. Devarim means like words, and achadim is one, but it already says they spoke one language. They were of one word, of one mind. I think the translation here says common purpose. The Medrash says Devarim achadim can be understood as achudim. Achudim as in the meaning of the word to conceal. Meaning that the Torah here specifically hides things from us. That's how the Parsha is starting. And these people were of one language, udvarim achadim, and some kind of achudim, meaning secret or concealed conspiracy or thought or mind. And the Medrash says, Maaseh dor hamabul nisparesh. The Torah makes it very clear why the generation of the flood was punished. Maaseh dor haflaga lo nisparesh. But the Torah doesn't tell us what these people did that was so wrong. But I would be incorrect, though, in translating the Torah doesn't tell us. What does lo nisparesh mean? Doesn't explicitly tell us what these people did wrong. But without question, the Torah wants us to look at this parsha, the story of the Tower of Babel, and take a closer look and find what these people did wrong, but yet for some reason the Torah doesn't want to tell us. And it's striking, especially since the Medrash puts them together, how much, if you would look back at the beginning of the Parsha, the Torah makes it very clear and almost lists every single one of the sins of the people of the generation of the flood. They stole, they some idol worship, but mostly they were in the world of immorality. The Torah makes it very clear all the sins which they did. Here, you read the Parsha, and just a very loose translation of the words, if you want to see in the Chumash on page 48, 49, or you can hear it outside. Basically, the Torah says, all the land was of one language, they were all of common purpose, and it was that they traveled from the east, and they found a valley, and they lived there. And one said to the other, come, let's build some bricks, let's make a furnace, and then we'll make the bricks into stones, and we'll turn our mud into material for building. And they said, let's build a tower, let's build a city, with a tower reaching to heaven, and we will make ourselves a name, lest we be dispersed upon the land. Anything wrong with this? They wanted to be together. That's what it sounds like they're saying. And God comes down to look at the city and the tower, and God said, these people they're so unified. They're one language. Look at them getting along so well. And then they'll be able to accomplish anything. No. Let's muck all this up. Let's confuse them. We'll give them separate languages. And God dispersed them, and they could no longer build a city. And that's why it's called Babel, because Babel means confusion. And from there, everyone spread to all the world. The simple reading, which is how most people who have a very simple-minded perspective of the Torah read this and say almost like God is concerned about some kind of competition or some other thing, that these people, isn't unity like one of the most desired things in the world? So the Medrash tells us they did something wrong here, but the Torah doesn't say it clearly, and you do have to look for a clue. So if I were to ask you, just studying these verses, which words here would you think would be most likely to help us understand what they did wrong?
Let us make a name for ourselves.
Let us make a name for ourselves, right? Nasalanu shem. That sounds... Well, lest we be dispersed, I think, you could, but in terms of any negative connotation in what they were doing, that, it's almost unnecessary. What does it even mean? Let's make a name for ourselves. How do we even translate that? What does that mean? We'll build a tower and make our name for ourselves. How does that fit with the rest of the sentence? That is where you take a step into the Torah and move away from just a surface view and say, well, one second, let's look a little more closely. And when you start looking at the verse a little more closely, you say, well, that sentence doesn't even make sense. So there's something going on here that I'm supposed to look at. I'm reading this wrong. If I read this whole sentence as, we need a place to live, and we can be all together, if that's how you're reading it, then those words, let us make a name for ourselves, doesn't really fit.
Also, like bricks and dirt and fire, why do I need all that?
Why does the Torah tell us what they were? Right? Okay, so the first step here is the Radak. Radak, Reb David Kimchi, one of the early commentators, one of the early medieval commentators. He is one of what we would call the Pashtanim. The Pashtanim were this group of medieval commentators who, many times ignoring the way that our sages, who lived 1,000 years before them, read the Torah, they would just ignore that and present a pshat reading of the Torah. And I'd like to address this in our first class, because we're going to come back to this hopefully a few times throughout this year. Where do they get the right? I'm talking here about the Radak, the Ibn Ezra, the Rashbam. These were some of our greatest heroes in terms of Torah commentary, and yet we find throughout the Torah that they will totally ignore our tradition, going all the way back to Sinai, and give an explanation that's counter to what we would believe. In fact, some of the other commentators will, in many cases, maybe we'll even read that when we get to it, but the Ramban at one point says on the Ibn Ezra, someone should have poured hot gold down his throat. Right? So, I mean, that's what he says, because how dare you offer an explanation that's counter to what we believe in? And that's a good question. That's a question, and we need to understand that there are different levels of the understanding of Torah. And somehow these commentators understood that if our rabbis were speaking on level 3, which is drush or midrash, that they are entitled to offer pshat.
Didn't the Ramban know that?
So you'll find many times that, I guess what we'll see, we're going to discuss this in those cases, but what you'll end up having is what it comes down to is a disagreement between the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra as to whether in this case our sages were speaking in the world of Drush or in the world of Pshat, or things like that, which hopefully we'll get to. But clearly what these Pashtanim, what they felt was that they are aware of what our sages say, they knew what they said, and yet they said, I am entitled, I am permitted to offer an explanation which goes against what they say in the world of Pshat. Of course, this leads to a very dangerous place, which is where some random person comes along in the 21st century and says, well, if the Ibn Ezra can ignore the words of the sages and offer his explanation in the realm of Pshat, so then that means it should be no different, I should be no different. I should also be able to ignore the words of our sages and offer an explanation in the world of Pshat. So that is actually right in some cases, but wrong in others. And unfortunately, most of the people who are doing this don't have the knowledge or the understanding or the recognition for where those lines are. And that's why you'll find many people who end up getting banned or excommunicated or things for saying things which are counter to the Torah, even though they say, well, I'm not saying anything more bold or brazen than what some of the medieval commentators might have said. And I don't know if we're going to focus so much on this, but in our first class it's important to point out that there are lines. And one of those lines, and maybe the most important line of all, is that the difference between the Ibn Ezra and the person today who's doing the same thing is that the Ibn Ezra ignored the words of our sages in some cases, knowing well the words of our sages. And never with a dismissal or with a disrespect. He's just saying, they're speaking in that realm, I'm speaking in this realm. But what ends up happening today is you have so many people who are offering commentaries which are just pure fantasy. And it's not so clear whether the Torah allows you to say, just take an example, that Yitzchak Avinu had some type of psychological disorder because of the trauma of being put on the altar, which causes him to misunderstand what's going on in his household. I'm just quoting one example of a silliness which is spewed by where do you get? Well, listen, the Ibn Ezra adds things in Pshat, so why can't I add things in Pshat? Okay, well then why don't you add in Pshat that Yitzchak was a winemaker? Why don't you add in Pshat that Yitzchak was a baseball fan? Well, it's no different. If that can be made up, why can't I make this up?
Well, why would he be if the Cubs weren't going to the World Series?
Right.
Well, Rivka was holding a pitcher.
Oh, man.
So the thing. So where you get to make these things up, that's where the danger area lays. So coming back, and we'll come back to this. Coming back to the Radak, who's one of the Pashtanim, he reads these verses very simply. That the generation of these people wanted all of humanity to live in one place, in one city, in one tower, and they didn't do anything wrong. But it was counter to the will of God, who wanted the earth to be populated. And so therefore, God dispersed them. That's why they weren't killed. That's why they weren't really punished. Just God put the people in the world hoping that people would just find their own way. And when people chose and used their free will to choose to live in one place, because they felt that this would make them more productive, God didn't want that. Now, if I was to ask you, why would God want people to be dispersed? What would you suggest? What would be the benefit of that? What would be the purpose of God wanting people to be dispersed?
I think that we have an obligation of tikkun olam, and if we only are in one place, then maybe we're not able to carry that out.
What would be an example of something which we couldn't do in terms of fixing or correcting the world?
Well, perhaps if the idea is that we are supposed to watch out in some way for the environment. If we're not in the environment, we can't very well do that.
Well, I'm not sure if is that. I think the environment handles itself. The reason why we have environmental issues is because we as people have messed with the environment. But if we were all living in one area, one might argue that the environment would be better off. Maybe, I don't know.
Unless it was Cleveland.
Right.
I thought that the Jews were supposed to go around the world and collect all the sparks from the time of the original Chet.
Right. So, but the thing is, it's a good point. We, spiritually speaking, right? Well, right. The sparks would be where the people are. So it would all be in one place. And besides, we know that in the days when the Beit HaMikdash stood, we didn't need to be in exile because the Beit HaMikdash became like something that would draw the nations of the world to come and visit, and they would bring the sparks to us. So maybe that's a good idea. I'm just saying on a practical level.
Well, if he made the earth and made the creation for our benefit, we can't benefit from it if we're not in.
Okay, so
place.
right. In other words, let me say that differently. If we were all living in the Mediterranean basin, where would we get all the hundreds and thousands of different kinds of wood that we use to build and structure things to make things look nice? This kind of goes in the Amazon. Who would bring out all that's there? What about all the medicines? What about all the different foods in the world? All the metals? We would be stuck and limited to that aspect of creation which we've limited ourselves to. That's a good suggestion.
We wouldn't have a chance to appreciate. I mean, if everyone was there, then no one would ever see the Grand Canyon, or no one would ever know about the poles, or
There goes the tourist.
are we supposed
Yeah,
to
I mean, how would
appreciate?
we would never know about a polar vortex, right?
How are we supposed to know about the creation if we're not actually actively seeking it out and exploring it and being part of it?
It also sounds like
The
this
reason
time-
why I said penna foods, that we shouldn't spread out, it's almost like, okay, we're going to have to control the population here. Like it's a way of doing something that Hashem didn't want.
So that's a good point to add in. What happens is when you don't have space, you feel confined, and then you don't allow yourself to populate the world the way the world needs to be populated. If someone has 20,000 acres that's just for them, then they're not going to say, well, where are the grandchildren going to live? They can have 1,000 acres each. So when you spread out, it does create that feeling of the requirement to populate the world. You see all this space. And so according to the Radak, the emphasis actually becomes on that pen nafutz. What they were doing was they were not necessarily anything wrong as much as they were going counter to the way that God had planned that the world should go.
So why
And-
does he tell
Hashem
what
says-
to do, and why does he have to,
So free will is free will. God's not interfering. So God simply gave them different languages.
It also sounds like this story explains why they're different languages.
Right. So what's the hardest thing to explain now?
Nasel Anashim.
Then what does that mean? Make for ourselves a name. How does that fit? Right. That's what it says. Let's build a city and a tower with its head reaches to the heavens.
They didn't want it.
Right, and make for ourselves a name, lest we be dispersed. So the Radak has to then retranslate those words, "V'naseh lanu shem," make for ourselves a name. He has to read that as, let's make that as the symbol or the focus of our people in order to keep us unified around the tower. So make for ourselves a name really means make for ourselves a rallying point. And that's a difficult translation. And we all have to admit that.
The word name, though, isn't that sometimes used as to refer to God?
Yeah, we'll get to that's the other explanation. Well, that's the next explanation. But at this point, we're still in the Radak. And because the Radak is reading this without any sin, he's simply reading it as these people were attempting to limit the original plan of God, so God stepped in and adjusted a couple of things and made that things are going to end up the way he wants it. And according to this, make for ourselves a name isn't a negative thing either. It's just a rallying point. I think I like that way of saying it.
I find it hard not to see a little bit of arrogance in making yourself a great name, as though it's innocent, number one. Number two, when I think of great name, I can't divorce Abraham, whose name was going to be made great by Hashem.
Now it's interesting you say that because, of course, Abraham is the one who's not these people. He's the one who, in the next parsha, steps out and does do the will of God. So it is interesting that the V'naseh lanu shem is taken away from the people who wanted the shame and given to the one who. But that's still in the other explanation. We're just working within the Radak, and you're exactly right. This reading of V'naseh lanu shem, which seems like some act of arrogance or inappropriate act, is hard to read into the verse according to the Radak. Now the Ramban doesn't challenge the Radak from any of these, from a literary standpoint, but more, he says to the Radak, you're coming with pshat. Right? You want to read the simple, most surface reading of it. He calls the Radak Rodef HaPshat, which is a little bit of an insulting term, which means, because Rodef means like you're pursuing it or chasing it. In other words, you're trying to force the pshat in to a place where it doesn't fit. He says these people are fools, according to the Radak, because they knew the world was going to come to millions. The generation of the flood was millions of people. That was only 10 generations. How did they expect that millions of people would all live in one place and wouldn't disperse all over the world?
Why were they concerned about being dispersed? That's like the question I have looking at this. It's like, we're going to build ourselves a tower and make ourselves a name so that we aren't dispersed. I don't understand the connection between those things.
Well, he's saying, lest we go, because people will naturally move and find their own spaces. But if we have a name, if this is where things are happening, if all the good restaurants are in this tower, then people, right, nobody's going to go where there's no Eruv and no restaurant, so we'll have all the good stuff.
Like
And
New York, right?
right.
But wouldn't that...
And they had 2 towers.
But wouldn't that, if you're really trying to do it to keep everybody in one place, wouldn't that require some sort of despotic or oppressive or very strongly controlling central government to force people to stay there, even if they wanted to go out and
I mean, they would want to build a wall to keep people in rather than out.
I mean, but it seems to me that how... It's almost as if they're trying to set up a tyrannical type of government.
Well, maybe, although we would be reading into it, because in theory, any type of plan like this could be done with this feeling of unity. It can be done with a use the word hippie, but a sort of love-focused society and unity and peace and all that, and they would run their. In theory, it could be like that. I don't know if by definition.
That goes against human nature. There's always going to be someone who wants to do it differently. And in order to force them to do it differently, you'd have to force them.
Well, I maybe, but I think in every society, whatever structure you have, you're always going to have one guy who's trying to, more than one, but I'm saying there will be people, individuals, who will try to adjust every society so that it becomes most fitting with their personal agenda and desire for power. I think that's universal. I don't know if that's more true of a society trying to be unified than one which is trying to spread itself out. Although it might be more susceptible to it. So the Ramban, the point that the Ramban actually argues with the Radak on a pshat level and says that doesn't make sense that people would want this. This is maybe this is sort of what you say, but this is counter to the way people would do it and the way people would naturally want to go, and therefore the Ramban goes from pshat to sod, and he says, therefore, since the Radak is wrong, let me give you the secret for what this verse really means, and we're not going to go into the Ramban's secret, a very complicated subject, but let's the Gemara there.
Can you give us a remez?
Well, because basically the Ramban says is that they were trying to cut down the influence of God in the world through the interference of certain spiritual channels, put it in simple terms, and that was their problem. But that's in the realm of Sod. But we'll actually come back to Sod, not quite in the words of the Ramban, but something similar. Hopefully, if we have time.
I don't understand why the Ramban would say that this was counter to what people would want to do. I think people do like to stay in groups and feel there's a comfort in being within a community, with being together, rather than spreading out and, like, okay, these 1,500 acres are mine and those are yours.
He's saying building one city and expecting and having a plan that everyone should always live there is silly. That's what the Ramban says. He says it's silly and therefore illogical. You could argue in the Ramban. The Radak certainly does, but that's what the Ramban reasons. Okay, now that's pshat. Now we're going to skip remez and go to the realm of drush, and in the realm of drush we actually find our sages. The Gemara in Sanhedrin Kuftes. This is midrash, even though it's not technically midrash, and it's in the Gemara, which means it's actually closer to pshat. I'm just saying it's midrash relative to the Radak's pashtani pshat, which is the simple reading without the tradition and all the information. So
where do the sages come up with the midrash?
So we're understanding is that we'll see. They sort of some of it is tradition going all the way back to the original thing, and some of it is what they drew out from the verse. We don't have exactly where it is, and in some cases we do. We'll see. And I think that someone here suggested that the word shame itself. I think you were suggesting the word shame itself seems to have an idolatrous kind of connotation. And actually our sages say exactly that. But let's see. The Gemara suggests like this. The Gemara says, "My avud, what did they do?" The Gemara goes straight to the question. What did they do? So the first opinion in the Gemara is they said, "Let us build a tower, ascend to heaven, and break it with hammers so that its water will flow down." They were going to open the portals of heaven and take all the water.
But just after the flood, they wanted to do that again.
Right? That's what the first opinion in the Gemara says. That was the teaching in the school of Rabbi Shiloh. And when this teaching made its way to the West, to the sages in Eretz Yisrael, they laughed at this explanation, which is a very interesting dynamic itself, that this explanation makes it to Eretz Yisrael, and when it reaches those sages, they laughed at this pshat.
So it sounds like the sages don't agree with each other.
Yeah, and they said, if that explanation were true, if you're trying to build a tower to heaven, what's the best place to build a tower to heaven?
On top of a mountain.
On top of a mountain. Where are they building their tower to heaven?
In a
In the
valley.
valley.
And deep in the valley. So it can't be that their purpose was to reach heaven, right? Because I mean that's about as dumb as it gets to try to build to reach heaven, putting yourself at a disadvantage of 5 miles at least. Right?
Couldn't those words have just been allegorical, meaning let's build a skyscraper, a very tall
Well, for what
building?
purpose? Because if you're reading it as in order to crack the water jars of heaven to reach the water tower, so then
Did
they.
they really?
Okay, so
Yeah.
now the thing is, the commentaries do read this whole Gemara as metaphor, but we're just reading the words. To which Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Elazar said, no, you got this wrong. There were actually 3 different groups. One group wanted to ascend to heaven to dwell there. The second group wanted to build themselves an idol. And the third group wanted to go to war with God. They wanted to fight God and build a tower, what we would call a siege tower, to heaven.
So the same question arises, why not build it on a mountain and you'll be closer to...
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because here nobody laughs.
Yeah.
Why is nobody laughing? If they're trying to go to war with God or trying to ascend to the heavens, no one laughed here. So that's why the whole thing is read as really as allegory, a metaphor, and that's why people who read this and go, "Oh, this is so silly," they don't realize that these rabbis are laughing at you too because you think that you understood a word that they said. So then the Gemara continues and says, those people who chose that they were going to dwell in heaven. So it was about where they were going to live. They're the ones that were dispersed. Those who said, let's go to war with God, they were turned into monkeys and demons. That's why there are all these ape-like characteristics in humans, and human characteristics in apes, not because man comes from monkey, according to the Gemara. Monkey comes from man.
So the monkey wasn't created on the 6th day?
Right.
It was not?
So,
According to some understanding of
so
this.
there's no Hebrew word that Adam gave to monkeys and apes and orangutans?
Well, there are new things, and maybe it's a good question. Was there an original? But the thing is, if from a Kabbalistic point of view, a monkey really is a corruption of a human. It's not really an animal. It's a kof. It's a kof. A kof is a excuse the term, a perversion of the human form. Not that the animal is nice and cute, no issues. But the way that it's shaped is more of the representing what the evil aspect of a human, what you look like, spiritually speaking, when you corrupt your soul. So the monkey isn't that. The monkey represents that. So it actually it is quite possible that before human beings were created, that there would have not been a monkey. Maybe, yeah. But that's
So when they
how we're
say
getting
monkey,
into.
do they mean specifically just monkeys, or do they mean
It's a
all
kof.
the-
It's a
all
kof. A
monkeys,
kof. I think kof includes all the.
gorillas,
Well,
orangutans?
they're all very humanoidish. All of them, even spider monkeys, and they do have that in terms of their knowledge and understanding. And again, monkeys and demons. Demons, the Medrash seems to suggest that there were demons already created at the beginning of creation. One explanation is that they were created on the 6th day during twilight. So if so, then this would just be adding more demons.
What is a demon?
Spiritual, like humanoid creatures that are that bridge and dance between, excuse that term, our realm and a more spiritual realm, but they are forces for damage and darkness. In summary,
Clear as mud.
the words of the Gemara. Yes.
I've never thought this way before, but I'm wondering just the fact that archaeologists have reconstructed from skeletons something that's kind of a cross between a human, these prehistoric, their supposition of what prehistoric man looked like. That can give us some idea to understand.
Right. Cro-Magnon, right? So the Neanderthals, right? So according to this would actually help explain better why there are so few of them.
Right.
And the reason why there's so few of them, all these missing links that are missing, is because there were just a few of them. There was one generation, a group of, how many were there? A few hundred, a few thousand, of these people who were turned into monkeys. And I guess their generations would then have regressed to become full-out monkeys. But this first generation would have been humans who were shifted into and turned into these ape-like creatures, much like, say, the Nebuchadnezzar. If you've seen that famous painting by when Nebuchadnezzar became animalistic, and then before he came back to the throne, and he became wild, and so you would have these humanoid beings that we would find today, and unless you know, and it's pretty cool, if I may use that word, that our sages wrote this in a book thousands of years ago, that they wrote that there were these humans turned into apes way before anyone discovered any such. So it's not like someone's trying to then re-explain and say, well, we've got these beings, well, maybe they were humans who were turned into monkeys. We actually have this statement that the humans were turned into monkeys written thousands of millennia before there was a need for such an explanation.
Right, and there's also reports of, these,
I don't know about Bigfoot, right? But
feral youths that are wander away, and so it's not out of the realm of our thought,
right.
To conceive of what this could be.
Right. But that's the Gemara is very clear, and that's why you can hear clearly, without question, we are not in the realm of Pshat. We are not in the simple reading of the Torah. You find me a clue somewhere. Probably in the world of Remez, you could find one of the words here, which is Gematria Kof, which is monkey. But in the simple reading of this, you're going to have a lot of trouble finding any clue in the Torah that anyone was turned into a monkey. Okay? So says the Gemara, again, those who wanted to dwell up in heaven, they were dispersed. The ones who wanted to go war with God, they were turned into monkeys and demons. And then the third group that said, let's go and worship idols, they're the ones who God changed their language. Not dispersed, but God changed their language. Says
Which ones did he change the language?
The ones who said, let's go worship idols. Right?
Which ones were turned into monkeys?
The ones that wanted to go to fight God.
Oh, okay.
So I would say that it's basically the ultimate example of corruption of free will, which is to go to war with God, and so I guess it would be fitting that their minds were taken from them, or their humanity was taken from them. I don't know.
I don't know. It seems to me that worshiping idols and fighting God is sort of in the same realm. It's like
It's a different.
that's what you're doing.
No.
When you worship an idol, you're fighting.
Well,
against
it is different though. It is different because
what
when
exactly do you do when you fight Hashem?
Well, they were picturing some kind of god that they can, some old guy sitting on a big throne that they're going to go up and, throw axes at the angels and, use their ninja skills and beat the angels. I don't know.
It could have just been the concept maybe of just that they're defying God. There was just been a flood,
So,
They're
so
going to live up high. They're going to avoid the next one.
exactly. And that's why if you look at the next line in the Gemara, says Rabbi Nassan, Kulam l'shem avodas kechavim nischavnu. All these opinions are basically just trying to express another way of saying that they were worshiping idols. Which means exactly that. When they say, let's go dwell in heaven, it means let's take control of our situation. It's all metaphor, allegory. The point is that our sages understood that this was, in any way you want to phrase it, we'll find a way to get away from God. We'll find a way to overcome God. We will find a way to stop God from trying to punish us. That's what it means. We're going to break the sky and stop the waters from coming. We're going to take control. All of it is idol worship, says the Gemara, and that's why it says Nasa lanu shame, as we find elsewhere in the Torah, where the Torah says, the Torah many times tells us not to worship idols, and one of those places it says, V'shem Elohim acherim lo tazkiru, the names of other idols, the focus being on the word shame. Says the Gemara, the word shame is a clue, name, that it's a reference to Hashem. Hashem, who is just how we refer to God, the name. So Hashem, and Nasa lanu shame, means let's make our own Hashem, or let's fight against, or take control, or overcome Hashem's attempt to influence us. And there you have our sages focusing not so much on the story, but on that one part of the story, the Nasa lanu shame, that the Radak in his Pashtanis has trouble explaining. Our sages said, no, that's the clue to the whole thing. Because the Nasa lanu shame, that line where they say, let's make for ourselves a name, that smells of idolatry. That's let us take control. So the whole thing, what they're trying to do, let's build a city, let's build a tower with its head reaching to the heavens, meaning something where we're no longer need to be subservient and careful of God's providence in the world. So we've seen Pshat and we've seen Drush. And we see that the realm of Drush, which is what our sages say with the whole monkeys thing, and it's beautiful midrash and makes for great stories, and say that over at the Shabbos table. Where do monkeys come from? Right? It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin Kuftes. I just want you to know that sometimes we refer to God. This is off the topic, but it's interesting. We refer to God as Hamakom. Why? Because God is where existence is. God is the place. Much like God is omniscient and omnipotent, God is all-powerful, all-knowing, God is also all-encompassing. That all-encompassing, meaning that God is here, God is there, God is truly everywhere, is alluded to by the word makom. God is hamakom. We say it in the Pesach Seder, Baruch hamakom, Baruch Hu. And it's not clear why on Pesach we specifically invoke that name of God. But if you're like a little mathematics, if you take the name of God, Yud, K, Vav, K, Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, so take the square of each one. So 10 times 10 is
100.
5 times 5 is
25.
Vav, 6 times 6 is
36.
and 5 times 5 is 25. Add them together, you should get
186.
186, which is the numerical value of the word makom. So God's name, notice that, squared, which means, right, creating the area or the plane for existence, is the word for place, which is makom. So hear this. If the word makom, representing that God is here, God is there, and God is everywhere, and when we say Baruch HaMakom, we recognize God being all-powerful, then the people who would deny this are doing the opposite of makom. And therefore they become kuf vav pei, 186, the same numerical value as the word makom. Kof is the same numerical value as makom, because if makom represents me recognizing God is in charge and God is everywhere, the people turning into monkeys becomes the punishment for those who would deny that existence. That's just to fulfill the realm of remez, of illusion. But it's always going to fit. That's just the way things are.
I thought Kuf was with a Chaf. Was a Kuf.
Kuf.
It's with a Kuf.
Yeah. In fact, the letter kuf is the most unstable of all the letters. It's what we say, it's a messed up hay. So while a hay, which is the letter in the name of God, represents stability and structure and the finality of the creation of the world, the letter kuf is the monkey to the hay. I mean, if this world was created with a hay, it was corrupted by the kuf, which can't stand, and that's why kuf is the middle letter in the word sheker, which is falsity, creating instability in the world.
Also, if you think about the way kuf is written, it's kind of a very stylized monkey with the tail going down and the body curved around.
That's okay. That's it. Okay, well, yeah, I think that's right, especially if you.
Well, it's called a kuf, which is the same.
It's called right. That's what I'm saying. It's the kof. It's called a kof because it's the monkey to the hay, which represents this world as it should be. We talked about this world being created with the letter hay, and the kof is the corruption of that. That's why they would become monkeys. Okay. There is another approach, which we're not going to go into because we have very little time, and that's the approach of the Kli Yakar, who suggests, and I'm just mentioning because you mentioned it before, that actually their actions were good actions. God liked what they were doing, except God sees what's going on in the hearts of man. And in their hearts, they were doing it for their own power and their own name. And the Vanasa Lanu Shem, says the Kli Yakar, is not so much what they were saying, but what God said God saw they were really saying. So while they were professing this unity, while they were expressing it as, come, everyone follow me, and we'll all be united, what was really happening was all these different people were hoping to get something out of it. And so there was this conspiracy amongst all these people where they acted like they were all altruistic, but they were really just out for their own benefit.
So what were they trying to do? Get rid of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach? Is that what they were complaining about?
Well,
Because they didn't really have
what they were afraid of, according to many of the commentaries, was just that constant fear of another flood. Like, oh, don't do this. There was a flood.
So by getting rid of God, there won't be another flood.
Right, if they could somehow control or give something else power or something. Like, according to one, they were sending a message to God of go away and leave us alone, kind of thing. Others say, again, that's where...
But God already promised that there wouldn't be another flood.
Yes, the commentaries asked that. They said, well, it could be a flood of fire, a flood of water, and because God only said water, and it could be fire. They were still paranoid about the trauma of what had happened. Okay, so I just want to get to a very little time. I just want to fit in the explanation of the Mar V'Shamash. The Mar V'Shamash is technically a Hasidic sefer, and one of the leading Hasidic rabbis, and he says like this. And this is in the realm of the secret, very similar to what the Ramban is saying, that many times a nation or a people will do something, and they'll do something because on a spiritual level, that's who they are and what they represent. So I don't know if we would say that Esav, for example, his descendants have killed more people, and by that I mean medieval Europe and on, have killed more people than any other group by billions. It's not even close. I'm talking about in terms of future descent. No one has killed as many because in the Torah it says that Yitzchak says to Esav, "Al char v'chatichya, by your sword you shall live." And whether